And so again, I want to welcome you to this webinar on facilitation techniques. We're going to take a deep dive today into some techniques that you can use as board members when you are facilitating group processes or decisions or just regular board meetings. And so these are some techniques that we hope will be helpful to you in that work. So we have some objectives for this webinar. First of all, what we're going to do is define some of these techniques. We did a little bit of this in our last webinar, and that's when people said, well, we'd like to have a deeper dive into these. And so we'll identify what those techniques are and kind of do some definitions around them. We're going to spend some time practicing those techniques and demonstrate the use of them through this online meeting. Now, most of these techniques are techniques that you would use in a live meeting, but we do have ways that we've adapted them to Zoom. So you're going to see some of that technology, but at this time, what we're really trying to do is kind of get the techniques down and not necessarily go into the technology. So you'll see that technology, but we're not going to go into the process of how to do the technology at this point. We can do that at a later webinar if people are interested in hearing more about that, but it just seemed like a lot to cover and to learn. And so the third objective is to actually have a conversation then about how you all might apply these facilitation techniques in your board meetings or even meetings with community members. If you are having meetings with the community where you're trying to gather information and data on what is it that the community feels like they need from the Community Foundation, as the Community Foundation tries to be a leader in the region and in your communities around different leadership topics and community development topics. So we'll have a conversation about that. So to start out, what I would like for each of you all to do is to take a few minutes and think about a time that you chaired or facilitated a meeting in the past. And this could have been in a formal way or an informal way. So just a time that you chaired or facilitated or led a meeting. So take a few minutes and think about that. And so we've spent some time thinking about that. And what I've just demonstrated there is a technique where you actually use silence and silent reflection to get people kind of engaged in the meeting, to get them centered on the topic. Sometimes, you know, we may come into a meeting just like this webinar where, you know, 15 minutes ago, you may have been in the middle of working on a different project. And so your mind is really not on this particular topic. So if you're trying to talk about something in your board meeting, then you can actually just have people take a few minutes, even encourage them to close their eyes and imagine a situation. And so what we did is we had you think about an actual experience you've had chairing or facilitating a meeting. And now we want to get responses from the group on that. And so just feel free to reply to this. What are some of the challenges that you faced when you had to facilitate a meeting? Was there a specific challenge that came to mind? Anybody have one?
You want me to go ahead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My hand. I wasn't sure. I was like,
oh, sorry. I'm not.
That's okay, Donna.
Now I can see.
Can you see everybody now? Okay.
Yep.
All righty. So one of the biggest challenges that I've had in my facilitation experience is to get folks to actually participate by actually responding. The flip side of that, my second thing is getting people to quit responding so much, you know. But I'm really talking about the one individual who just will not stop talking about a subject. So it's the two different sides of the same coin.
Okay.
The same coin.
So people who won't respond when you ask a question, there's just dead silence, and you're going, okay, what's going on? Or you get one person that just goes on and on and on, and you're thinking, how can I get him or her to allow space for other people to talk? And we will address that in this webinar. So
yeah, I agree with Sandy. That's right on topic. Yeah, that's it.
Great.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing now is connection issues. With so many meetings being held via Zoom.
And you're talking about literally the internet connection. Is that right? Okay. Yeah. And that is an issue, I think, that is prevalent in rural areas. And so there are, and maybe we can get into that in a technology webinar, but I know there are ways that people, if they're having trouble connecting, they can turn off their video sometimes, and that will help stabilize the connection a little bit. If they are having trouble doing video and audio, they can do the video and then call in on a phone, but then they need to shut off their audio on their screen so that you don't get that interference. But yeah, that is, I think, a long-term issue that we're going to really have to deal with in this region. Anybody else for issues that you faced and challenges that you faced when you had to facilitate a meeting? Okay, well, we have we have some good input there. So did you notice that how when I asked the question of you all, that if the silence wasn't filled, I didn't immediately jump in. Try to give space for people to think. And that is particularly important when you are in these online meetings, because you may have, as the person who planned the agenda or the facilitator, you kind of have in mind the question that you're asking, and it's new to the folks that are seeing it on the screen or who are hearing it just verbally if you don't have it on the screen. And so allowing that quiet time for people to, again, reflect on the question and then be able to step in and say something works both online and in live person meetings. And so just as a facilitator, if you're running a meeting, even stop and count to 5 if you have to make yourself not jump in and fill that silence immediately, because I guarantee you somebody in the meeting will step in and fill the silence, because people are uncomfortable with silence in most times. But we'll also talk a little bit about when people really don't feel the silence, what is it that we can do. So, all right, so here's the thing about being a board member or a chair of the board or someone who has a stake in the group when you are facilitating, is that you're actually not just a facilitator, but you are a facilitative leader. And so what does it mean to be a facilitative leader? So right now, if you are someone who is just called in as a pure facilitator, that in essence, you don't have a stake in the decision that the group is making, you are just interested in process and creating that process, that kind of facilitation is actually a little bit easier in most cases than being a facilitative leader, because facilitative leaders have a stake in the decision. That is, that you're going to have an opinion about it, and you're going to have to balance that opinion with the other opinions in the group. But you have to do that in a way that's fair, and do that in a way that you're actually open and listening to other people. And as a facilitative leader, the fact that you're running the meeting and that sometimes you may actually be standing up in front of the group while other people are sitting down, that puts you in a power position that you just have to keep in your mind and acknowledge as a facilitative leader. So you can even be open and upfront with your group when you're saying, okay, I'm running this meeting as a facilitative leader, and that means that I do have a stake in this, and I do have an opinion, and I want to be able to share that opinion sometimes. But I want you all to understand that I don't expect to have absolute decision-making power. So I'm open to input, but I'm also going to share my opinion. So just being transparent about it in that way. So a facilitative leader is also interested in both product and process. And so what we mean by that is that you are interested in the outcome. You have that stake, but you also need to think about process. And so that's why these facilitation techniques that we're talking about are going to be helpful to you as a facilitative leader. Sometimes you're going to have to restrain yourself from speaking out too much in order to maximize other group members' contributions. I think that can be especially hard as a facilitative leader when you have that stake. You also need to embrace conflict as a normal and healthy part of exploring decisions. And that can be really hard when you are working in a group that you're, a long-term member of, and those conflicts, you could worry about those impacting your relationships. And so we've done webinars earlier about, group communication norms and things like that. So as a facilitative leader, those norms can help you and we're not going to go through those norms again, but what I encourage you to do as a facilitative leader is to go back on onto the YouTube page for the foundation and check out those webinars so that you can think about what is it that we want to create as communication norms for our group. So you can use those as a facilitative leader. And then as a facilitative leader, again, I can't emphasize enough that being comfortable with silence as a sign of group reflection. But then if you don't get response from people, using some of the prompts that we're going to talk about and the ways to engage people that we're going to talk about. So, let me ask if there are any questions about facilitative leaders at this point, or comments, thoughts about that. Sandy.
I just wanted to comment on the conflict, which is enormously challenging for me. I'm a complete conflict avoider, but I recently had an opportunity to read a book on something to do with dysfunctional teams, and honestly, it's like the case that they made. If you are unable to deal effectively with appropriate conflict, where you're not, calling each other names, but you're calling each other's ideas out, then you are a dysfunctional team, because that means you will never be able to work your idea to its fullest capacity, and to really get it out there. That helps me some in being able to reframe my displeasure and uncomfort with conflict. But it fascinated me when I heard it described that way.
So working with your group to frame conflict so that you create a shared understanding about the value of conflict. So it sounds like that you're developing a very healthy understanding that we're talking about here, embracing that as a normal and healthy part of exploring decisions. And so how can we have those candid conversations with our groups? And, it feels like when you're having those conversations that you're not really perhaps dealing with, the business that the group needs to be doing. But if the group can't work well together, then you're not able to deal with the business as effectively that you need to be doing. And so this group process part of the work is very important. And I think it's particularly important for community foundations in the sense that you are community leaders as well as organizations in your communities. So last week I attended the Community Foundations Boot Camp with the Southeast Community Foundations group. And they kept reiterating the fact that community foundations are leaders in their communities and that it's important to take on that role. And so, in a sense, your organization itself, your board itself, plays the role of a facilitative leader in your community, in that you have a stake in what you want to accomplish, and you also want to be open to input from the community in what you want to do. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit, just get these definitions of some of the facilitation techniques that we are going to go through today. The facilitation techniques, we actually sent you a handout, and we'll send it again with the previous webinar that we did. So don't worry about jotting all these down. We'll send you something that has this information and actually more depth in the handout, so that you'll have that definition of what it is, how to do it, and when to use it. So the first facilitation technique that we want to look at is brainstorming. And that is essentially a process where you list ideas as quickly as you can. You're looking for quantity over quality of those ideas. It's a way to energize the group. So you don't have people evaluate ideas. You actually encourage them to have fun, throw out those ideas as quickly as they can, build off each other's ideas, and you try to capture those in a visual fashion, which means that in a live group, you may be doing that on a flip chart. So listing those as quickly as you can on a flip chart. Online, what we're going to do is we're going to use the Zoom whiteboard, and so we'll do that a little bit later to capture these ideas. Individual writing is a way. And so Sandy was saying that sometimes she has group meetings and she asks a question and nobody responds to it. Sometimes people don't respond because they can't gather their thoughts just without being kind of introspective. So to do individual writing gives time for people to gather thoughts in response to a specific question. you can do this in as simple a way as having some note cards in front of people. And then you say, okay, well, you know, I'm not hearing a lot of people talk about this topic, so let's take a few minutes and just, I mean, acknowledge the issue that you're trying to deal with and say, I would like everybody to jot down a couple thoughts on a note card that you have about this, this idea or this topic that we're trying to discuss. And so folks can then individually write about that. Or they could individually write around a very specific question that you craft. And then you can either have people respond on their own note card, or you can have people pass them around and share each other's thoughts. So it's a way to get people engaged when they're just being really quiet. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later too. Pairing off. This is another way to get people very involved if they're being quiet. And that is to just it's exactly what it sounds like, in groups of 2. Then you give people a specific question to discuss. You tell them how much time they have, and you give everyone a chance to talk and everyone a chance to listen. And so if you say, we're going to pair off for 10 minutes, and each of you take 5 minutes to respond to the question, then as the facilitator, you give them the question, you pair them off, and then you give them a reminder about, okay, we're 5 minutes through, make sure you switch and let your other partner talk. And so it's a way to engage people, again, who might be introverted and have a hard time speaking out in a large group, or if people are just kind of stumped about what to say about a topic. This helps kind of generate some energy around that topic and can bring the energy up in the room. Then there's groups that are larger than pairs, essentially, small group work. If you are in a situation where you are trying to accomplish a lot of work around, say you're planning an event, and you have to think about with this event how to do marketing, how to handle logistics, how to, who's going to be the entertainment. Let's say this event where you're going to have entertainment. So you've got these 3 topic areas that you want to talk about, but you only have 30 minutes for this conversation. And you realize that it's going to take more than 10 minutes per topic to talk about these. And so you can say, well, we're going to break into 3 groups and go to the group that you're interested in. We'll have one group talk about logistics, one group talk about the entertainment, and one group talk about logistics, whatever the other topic was I said earlier. But so you break them into those 3 topics, and then give them each, 15 minutes to discuss. So you're essentially getting 45 minutes worth of discussion done in 15 minutes, with 3 groups doing 15 minutes of discussion. They come back, share their main ideas to the whole group, and then you can do some follow-up after they report out. Okay, what are the next steps we need to do based on these reports? And so it's a way to accomplish kind of more in less time in groups. You don't always want to use small groups if you're trying to make a decision, though. This is really to kind of generate ideas and action steps and things like that. If those small groups don't have decision-making power about something, you need to be clear with them up front about whether why are we having these small groups? We're having these small groups to generate action steps around what we might need to do to plan this event, or we want you as your small group to make a decision about who's going to be the entertainment. So you just want to be clear about what the purpose of those small groups is. And then there's the round robin. This is another thing that is a process that's very good if folks are being quiet in your group again, or if you are in a situation where you're not quite sure about how everybody feels about a topic, if you're trying to seek consensus on something. Round robin, again, means that you just go around and provide every person in the group with an opportunity to respond to the topic that you're discussing. So, and it's as simple as going around the table. People can pass if they say, I don't have a thought, I don't have a comment, or somebody else already said my comment. But you give every person an opportunity to respond with round robin. And you give them typically a very specific question to respond to, or if you're trying to seek consensus, then you want them to respond to what they're thinking about the decision that you're getting ready to make. How strongly, the question may be, how strongly do you support the decision we're about to make? So that's what round robin is. And we're going to try to test out each of these techniques, but real quickly, are there any questions about those? Okay. So I'm going to quickly run through some techniques to support consensus decision making, because many times when you're working on a board like this, there needs to be some sense of consensus. And if you're working in the community, you want to understand how the community feels about a direction you may be heading with a decision. And that doesn't mean that you're not maybe eventually as a board going to vote on a decision. But if you get a good consensus of how the group feels, then it might make that vote go a little better and decrease division in the group around the vote. So here are some techniques to support consensus decision making. One of them is called fist to 5. And we're going to describe fist to 5 a little bit more later again, but it's basically creating a scale of 0 to 5 to show support by something, for something, by people holding up their hands. And so fist to 5 means this is 0. Fist, I cannot support this. I have to stand in the way of it. I think it has major issues to deal with. 5 means I'm completely on board. I wholeheartedly jump into this activity. But then people can have things in between, numbers in between. So if somebody holds up a 1, it probably, you know, and we're going to talk about this later too, but, you know, they may have some deep reservations about it, but, you know, I could be convinced. 2 means that, yeah, I have reservations, but I'm really kind of leaning more toward supporting this. 3 means I'm somewhat in the middle. 4 means I'm almost to a 5, and, you know, I would, you know, go along with it definitely, but, and then there's the 5. So it just gives you a sense, and this works better in a live meeting because it's difficult when you're online with seeing, you know, how everybody's holding up their hands if you have a large number of people in a meeting. But it's a quick way to get consensus of a group, particularly if your group is trusts each other and is able to be transparent with each other about how they're feeling about something. So that's fist to 5. Sometimes the setting criteria, sometimes we will create a list of options for people to choose from. And we just say, well, let's make a decision. Let's pick something out of this list of options. We're going to practice this too. So you brainstorm this list and you say to people, well, let's pick our top 2. What are the top 2 ideas you think you ought to pick off this list? That's a very hard thing for a group to just kind of go through and willy-nilly pick top 2 things. And so what you can do is say, let's set some criteria that we want to use to make this decision. And so you actually create a list of written criteria that the group then comes to agreement on, and you use that list to then do some straw polls or some sort of activity to make a decision around that meeting. So I need to admit somebody to the waiting room real quick. All right. And then straw polls, we will discuss what those are. Straw polls are a way for people to help kind of make a consensus-based decision that's not just pure out voting, because you will allow people to choose more than one thing. If you force people to choose just one thing off a list many times, then you know, it feels like there's winners and losers. But if people can pick their top 2 or 3 items, then at least there are some options to choose from. And again, we're going to practice this a bit later too. But people can use that straw poll technique to get a consensus of where the group's heading. If you have a long list of items that you're trying to make a decision around, that you don't just try to pick the top 1, pick the top 2 or 3 to start with, and give people color dots. A lot of people will see that with, they call it dotmocracy or the color dot voting, where you know, people can put their dots by the things, and you say you have 3 dots, pick your top 3 items on that list. So any questions or thoughts about those techniques to support group decision making? Okay. So let's practice. So here comes our practice. And our practice is going to be called Sweet Facilitation Gets Its Just Desserts. Because here's what we're going to be looking at as we work through this process in a group. So the first thing you want to do as a facilitator is you want to identify clearly and propose to the group clearly what is the problem that we're trying to solve with this agenda item that we are working on. And so there's a little background information here. The Affiliate Community Foundation Board is hosting a donor engagement and appreciation picnic on August 30th at the community park. Board members need to choose 2 desserts that will work well for this midday summer picnic. So this is a lunch picnic. What 2 desserts should the board choose? So that's our problem that we're trying to resolve in our meeting. So first of all, we're going to take some time and we're going to imagine that you are in a buffet line at a dessert and you're at the dessert area. So there's this table full of desserts in front of you. That table is filled with them. Just close your eyes and imagine that. What is it that you see on that table of desserts? What is it that you would like to, that are some of your favorites that are there? Okay, so if everybody's had a little time for quiet reflection, again, I'm centering us in on what the topic is that we're discussing. We're going to do some individual writing now. And so if you have in front of you a piece of scrap paper, or you can put this in the chat if you want to. If you don't have scrap paper, you can type into the chat window here on Zoom. What are at least 2 desserts that you saw on that table that you think you would like to see at this picnic? So just make a copy of a list of a couple of the desserts that you saw. Okay, so we've done the quiet reflection. We've done a little bit of individual writing. Now, choosing desserts is a pretty simple thing for people to do. But, if you have a bigger picture question, well, maybe it's not simple. I see a couple of looks that are saying, no, not really. People are pretty picky about their desserts. But if you have a much deeper question than that for your board, to give time for that reflective individual writing can be helpful in making tough decisions on your board. So that's a tool. But anyway, so we've listed our desserts. And so what we're going to do now is this technique of brainstorming. And here's where I'm going to stretch my own Zoom muscles a little bit. And see, I'll have to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to share our whiteboard. But what we're going to do is we're going to brainstorm our list of desserts that we think might be good to have at this picnic. But we're not going to evaluate them. So we're going to list as many ideas as quickly as we can. We're going to seek quantity over quality. We're not going to evaluate. So as people are calling out their ideas, popcorn style. So we'll do this popcorn style. So everybody will unmute at once and just yell out your ideas. It's okay to build off others' ideas. And it's okay to include those wild ideas. So if somebody says, I want to have champagne jello, that may be a little different than a dessert that we see around here, but, call out that wild idea. It's quite all right. So let me I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I am going to share the whiteboard. Oops, all right. Okay. Put you guys over there. So whiteboard is a function that's in Zoom that if you go to the share screen function when you're hosting a meeting, then you can pull up a whiteboard and share it with people so that they can see and you can type in real time for them. So we are going to have a desserts list. So let's have first person, we're just going to brainstorm and I'm going to try to keep up as best I can. So give me your list of desserts.
Chocolate cake.
Cheesecake.
Apple pie.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Red velvet cake.
Oh, yeah. Oops, I'm not supposed to evaluate.
Chocolate fountain.
A chocolate fountain? Is that what I heard?
Pound cake or fountain. Oh,
Key lime pie.
Oatmeal cookies.
chocolate chip cookies.
Strawberry shortcake.
Mm-hmm.
Getting hungry too, by the way.
That's right.
Brownies.
Brownies, yeah.
Cherry pie.
Strawberry jello.
Strawberry jello?
Mhm. Yes.
All right.
Fresh fruit.
Fresh fruit.
Pineapple upside down. Cake.
What about a blackberry cobbler? I don't know.
All right.
Vanilla
So,
ice cream.
oh, one more?
Vanilla ice cream.
Vanilla
Yeah.
ice cream. All right. Yeah. Good. Okay, so you can see that we have a pretty good list of desserts, and we could have gone on for a while. And that's what you want to do when you're brainstorming, is you do want to go on until the group kind of fizzles out. Now, we're not going to do that here because we're going to be pressed for time. But you just keep recording these as quickly as you can. If you're in a live meeting, you want to capture these on a flip chart or on a whiteboard for people. I'm a fan of flip chart pages myself because then you have the list keep with you, unless you take a photo of it with your phone off the whiteboard. But I'm going to drag you guys back over here so I'm not looking off to the side. Anyway, so you work on these until you get that full list of, and the group kind of seems to fizzle out. So you could have a pretty good list. And then you look through the list and you kind of go, well, are there things that we could combine that are similar before we start brainstorming criteria? Because one of the things that we're going to have to do now is, from this list, we're going to pick 2 desserts. So it's not really going to be an easy task, probably. And so we could look at, you know, the fact that we've got several fruit pies on here. So would we want to combine the fruit pies, for example, and say, well, let's have some kind of fruit pie or multiple kinds of fruit pie as our desserts? So that's just, I'm not going to go through that process now just because, again, we're kind of short for time, but it's a way that you can narrow this list down a little bit to make it a little easier to select things from. So we went through the brainstorming technique. All right, so now I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go back to our PowerPoint screen. Oh, and I see some folks. Let me peek at the chat real quick. So, oh, good. People have put things in the chat as well. So you all are learning. This is a good way also to use chat if you're having online meetings as a way to generate ideas quickly from people. And everybody on the screen can see them if they're able to open their chat. But the benefit of using Whiteboard for that is that you've got the list in front of everybody. And I'm going to show you a little bit later about how we can annotate things on the whiteboard and give you all an opportunity to actually color dot vote or do a straw poll using Whiteboard. So, all right, so let me share. This screen again. Okay, so we just did our brainstorming. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create those criteria for the group to consider as you make a decision about what desserts you want to have at your picnic. And so basically that's what criteria are, is what is it that this group should be considering and how we make the decision. Those criteria might focus on interests, and those could be personal interests, like I love chocolate and I have to have chocolate brownies. That's my, whatever we have, I don't care what it is, it's got to have chocolate in it. So could be chocolate chip cookies, could be chocolate brownies. But then those criteria could also explore restrictions, such as what's it going to cost? How much time would it take to make this dessert? If it's a dried apple stack cake, you know, I've made those in the past and they take hours because you've got like multiple layers, you know. And so are we going to have somebody try to make dried apple stack cake, or do we not have time for that? Or in the case of ice cream as a dessert, what about temperature? If we're having a picnic outside in August, do we need to think about temperature and how that impacts whether we have ice cream or not? So I was hoping somebody would bring up ice cream, John, so I'm glad you did that because that was one of my examples. So in order to create these criteria, rather than doing this as a whole group, because that's going to take a little while, what I'd like to do is practice with you all pairing off in as pairs to create a list of criteria. So that's what we're going to do is I'm going to put you into breakout rooms in Zoom just randomly with 2 people in each breakout room. And I want each of you, while you're in there, to come up with at least maybe 2 or 3 criteria that you would use to evaluate which desserts we should choose for this picnic that we're going to have for our donor appreciation picnic. So that's your assignment when you go into your pairs, is create a list of 2 to 3 criteria that you would use to evaluate this list. So I'm now going to put you guys into breakout rooms. All right. So I'm going to send you there, and I will bring you back in about, say 5 minutes or so. So here we go. I think you might need to click join for the breakouts. And Deanna, I'm not sure you got into a breakout room, and I'm not sure why, but are you still here and can you hear me? Okay, welcome back, everybody. And hopefully, I think we have everybody back by now. Yeah. Good. Okay, and Emily, I moved you rather suddenly into another breakout room because we figured out that Deanna doesn't have audio, and so if you were wondering why you couldn't hear anybody in your breakout room, that's why. So, so thanks to everybody for taking part in that, and we are going to now go back to our whiteboard and capture some of the criteria that you generated in your small groups. So. We are playing a lot of calisthenics with Zoom today, back and forth. So on our whiteboard, we still have our list of desserts. And so let's create some of the criteria that you want to use to evaluate them. So who would like to share a couple of the criteria that you generated?
I'll happily do it.
Okay.
Okay, I was in a breakout room with Kathy Aitkins from Pikeville Community College. We wanted to have dietary restrictions concerned, where it was like a sugar-free, gluten-free, nut-free considerations. And the second thing we said was summary. It needed to be something summary.
Okay, great.
Which I'm sure is a word.
Yeah.
Summary.
Summary, not summary, summary. Yep. Who else has a criteria?
Okay, I'll do. I was in the breakout room with Bobby, and we wanted to, the criteria was have favorable conditions to accommodate the dessert. So like if we had ice cream, we need to make sure that we had a freezer.
Okay.
So I don't know how you would really word that, but we need to make sure that we could accommodate the dessert easily. And then ease of access. If a person was going to make the dessert, we wanted to make sure they get all the ingredients that they needed. And then also if they, you know, had the time, so the ease of access would kind of encompass all those.
So favorable conditions to accommodate. So if you don't have a freezer for ice cream, then you would say that's off the list.
Right.
If you have access, do we have the ingredients? Can we get maybe you might want to be, you know, getting the ingredients locally. If there's a farmer's market that you have and you say, we want to support our local farmer's market, so let's make something that uses those ingredients. So those are the types of criteria that, that we can use to evaluate these. So is there anybody else that has one or two criteria real quickly?
Our group came up with how to transport it. Is it something you can easily transport? Are you going to have to walk up a hill and carry it? Then you don't want to your cake.
Yeah, like a wedding cake. Yeah, those are problematic sometimes. Yeah. All right, so we've got a list of criteria. So John.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we kept it simple. We agree with dietary. We said healthy and then rich desserts.
So healthy.
The opposite, healthy
and rich desserts. Rich. So something that for folks who are health conscious and something for somebody who just wants to be decadent. Gotcha. Right. Okay. So you can see how generating those criteria, you kind of get some idea. Now, there in your group, you would actually go through a process as well. We just don't have time today. You would go through a process to say, do we have consensus on these criteria? You know, if you're making a really important decision, is there anybody who disagrees that dietary restrictions are important? And so that's a good way, if you're checking for consensus, to ask that question kind of in the opposite. So that if you have one person that says, I disagree that dietary restrictions are important, you can just acknowledge, well, we don't have complete consensus on that, but do we need to discuss it? And the group can decide whether or not to discuss that. But you would come to some consensus on the criteria. And then based on those criteria, if you were doing the dotmocracy, then you would have people vote or put their dots up. So pick the top 3 dessert items you see here that meet the criteria that we have listed and agreed upon. So you use those criteria then to make that decision to narrow down this list. And so we're going to try to do that now. I need to give you all permission to annotate on this list. And I
think we have permission already.
Okay, good. Excellent. So the way that you can annotate onto this list is at the top of your screen, there should be something that says View Options. So if you're on a computer, and I know some folks are not on computers maybe, but you should see something that says View Options. Is there anybody who doesn't see that at the top of your screen? If you click that View Options, it will pull down a little menu, and in that menu there is a word Annotate. One of the menu items is Annotate, so just click that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll see a toolbar.
Mm-hmm.
And on that toolbar, you can see text, draw, stamp, spotlight, some of those types of things. So if you go to the stamp tool and click that, or just scroll over it, you'll see that there are little hearts and little stars and things like that. So those are going to be our color dots. And this is going to be an honor system that you get 3 stamps. So pick whichever stamp you want to pick. The star, the heart, the arrow, the check. And that's right. I see somebody put a heart by Blackberry Cobbler. So put your stamp by 3 of the items that you think should be on our dessert. Okay, and can you guys see how the dots and the stars and the hearts and the stars and the X's and the checks are showing up there? And in real time on a flip chart, what you would have is you would have people putting color dots on to mark these things, and you get a real visual that way. And you can get a visual on this as well. It's a little more awkward because you know, it's hard for people to line the dots up because we're not really seeing this same thing. People are putting dots on at the same time, but you get some sense, I think, that it's either apple pie or red velvet cake up here that look like they are, I'm going to try the draw thing, that look a little bit like they may be getting a lot of votes. So, you know, we could narrow it down to that. We could maybe narrow it down to apple pie. Oh, wait a minute, key lime pie.
I think fresh fruit has 4 too.
Okay, and fresh fruit has 4. So we have taken this full list, and I realize it's kind of hard to count the dots, but those are the ones.
I did multiple votes by accident.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's okay. But you see how if people really could do this with just 3 dots, it kind of shows up very quickly what is at the top of your list. And so we had a list of what, 20 desserts, and we are down to the top 4. So those are the top 4 that we can now discuss based again on our criteria. So, you know, if we say we want these folks food there that is sugar-free, gluten-free, and nut-free, that fresh fruit seems to fall in that category pretty well, right? Those other desserts are going to have more sugar in them than fruit's going to have. So, you know, the group could have a discussion around that. Access to ingredients. You know, we can discuss whether or not ingredients are easily available to make any one of these. The time to make them. We can talk about how long it takes to make the desserts as we are discussing these final 4. We can talk about how healthy they are. We can talk about all of those criteria that you all generated in order to determine how you want to decide which desserts to pick. So we got that list of what, like 10 or 12 down to 4 using that technique. I'm going to stop sharing that screen because we are running close on time here. And we will go back to our PowerPoint. All right. So we did creating criteria, we did pairing off. Oh, and I had meant to share the scenario again as we were pairing off so you would remember, but that's okay. We just did our straw poll on the whiteboard. So that is sticky.voting.mocracy. That process is very helpful early in a decision-making process, or when you're trying to get a sense of the group temperature about how they feel about something. So using sticky.voting is not necessarily the best way to make the final decision, because there's further discussion to be had. But because we had narrowed that list down to 4 items and then had criteria to use to discuss those items, it's going to help with that final decision making. So round robin is that technique, and I'm afraid we're running short on time, so we're not actually going to do this part of the activity. But if, let's say we got down to our top 2 items on this list, and we wanted to just check to see whether folks in the room are comfortable with the top 2 items that we've picked, then we would go around and have hear every voice. And we might ask a question that's something like, you know, so would you be comfortable eating one of the 2 desserts that we have? And go round robin and get a response from each person. Well, yes, I would eat that dessert. Yes, I would eat that dessert. No, I wouldn't eat that dessert, but I'm still okay with the group having those 2 desserts. And so you go round robin and ask each person for their opinion. Again, we had the point raised early on in the webinar when we talked about some of our issues that we've faced when we're facilitating meetings where maybe one person is dominating. This round robin technique is also a good way to counteract that. If you've got one person that's talking, and you just really want to hear from other people, then you politely say to that person, well, I'm glad you're sharing your opinion. Let's go round the group and hear from everybody. And so it's helpful for that purpose. Also, when group members are quiet, or as I said, when you need to check for consensus around choosing our desserts or whatever we're trying to make. So we also have the ability online to do Zoom polls to check for consensus. And I do have some polls here that I will launch real quickly. Oh, this says I'm logged in from another device and my polling session is inactive. Interesting. Can you pull the poll up, Jacqueline? Okay, great. So if Jacqueline could launch that poll.
It's launched now and you should see it. So I'd love to know if people can see it with like a nod of your head.
Okay. So let's say that we, those top 4, let's think about the top 4 desserts that we had on our list. Are they appropriate choices?
Just in the interest of time, it seems like most people have done the polls. I'm going to go ahead and launch the results and share the results. Can you all see the results? So 100% agreed that our top desserts are appropriate choices. So I'm going to stop sharing those results now.
Excellent. Okay, and then we have one more poll that I want to do because you can use polls not just for content or product that you're working on. You can also use it for process. So let's say you're doing an online meeting or you're doing a live meeting and you want to ask this question. As the facilitator, you can say, our discussion is running past time, but you know, and I'm not sure whether you all want to continue discussing this agenda item now, or if we want to move it to the next meeting. So you can do a poll to do that. And you could launch that poll real quickly. Well, I don't guess we need to launch the poll actually, Jacqueline, because we're not.
I launched it a little prematurely, so people are responding now, fine. But I can go ahead and end it.
All right, so that's a way though, when you're in a set amount of time, that you can get people to respond and make the decision as a group as to whether you continue discussing a topic or don't continue discussing a topic. It empowers the group to make that decision instead of you making it unilaterally as a facilitator, which is helpful with group process. And then we talked about fist to 5 earlier. That's like an in-person poll that can happen. That is also helpful when one person is dominating, when group members are quiet, or when you need to check for consensus. And I have found the best online graphic to illustrate fist to 5, and so I stole it from them, a group called lucidmeetings.com, but it's basically, you know, this is your range. No way I'll block this. I see major issues. I see minor issues. I see minor issues, but we can resolve them later. I'm fine with this as is, and I love this. I champion it. So that kind of gives you some idea of how fist to 5 works. And you can see that, you know, the 0 to 2 is lack of consensus, and 3 and above is shows that you've got stronger consensus in your group. So I wanted to end, and we only have a couple minutes, but with the group discussion, that we could have done as a small group discussion. We could also do as written questions in chat, or you know, you can respond in chat or on index cards if you're in a live meeting. But let's pick one of these questions and say, let's think about how is it that you might use these facilitation techniques in meetings that you have. Does anybody have ideas about using them that you'd like to share real quickly?
Well, especially right now, the polling with the Zoom meetings is it's especially helpful. And two, sometimes people don't want to express their opinion, and it's also anonymous.
Yeah, right. You can actually set those polls up, I think, to be anonymous or not anonymous. But I'm not so sure what they look. I've always set them up anonymous, and so I'm not sure what they look.
You can download the poll results after as the meeting host, and if it's not anonymous, nobody else can see what other people say, but you can see who responded in what way.
Yeah.
I think for transparency, you should let people know whether or not.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope to be able to use that the imagination part where you're like centering folks on the idea to think about it for a little bit before launching right into brainstorming. I tend to launch right in, and that centering really helps a lot to make that much more effective.
Right. Because we're really taught that brainstorming is something that should be just really off the top of your head. But for some folks, that doesn't work. They need time to gather thoughts. If you're introverted, particularly, it's hard for you to jump into a meeting. And so providing that reflection time, I also have found very helpful before going into a brainstorming process. So are there any questions that folks have about these techniques? You could put those in the chat. I haven't been doing a good job of monitoring chat. So or call them out if you have questions.
Really helpful to see you use the board.
Okay, well, it's 1 o'clock and I've got one more slide I want to let you all know about. Oops. Oh, actually, I actually had more than one slide, but here's another thing you can do real quickly is at the end of every meeting, you can do a process evaluation with your meetings. And it's a simple thing. Some people do it as a plus minus change so that it's what's positive, what's negative, what could we do better, or what would we want to change. I think this way with just 2 questions, what went well and what would you change? If you ask people to give things that are negative, they kind of feel conflict averse sometimes, and it's easier to say, well, what would you change about this meeting and what went well about this meeting? So ending your meetings with that process and saying to people, really be honest to me as a facilitator and to how the meeting was run all together, because together as a team, we want to make our meetings better. And this is a tool that we can use to do that. So just a regular process evaluation is helpful to keep your meetings going. And so here's the slide I thought we were on. I'd forgotten I'd put the evaluation thing in there, but our next webinar will be on August 25th. That one is going to be on donor development, and Ann Nash, who is with My Giving Advisor, is going to be our presenter for that. She was once with the Bluegrass Community Foundation and is now out consulting about how to do donor development. So watch for that registration email to come soon. And appreciate everybody's attending today and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. So,
thank you.
Everybody take care.
Everybody have a good day.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.